Section 9. Letters 40 to 45. Letter the 40th. The Vicomte de Valmont to the Marquise de Merteuil.
Not content with leaving my letters without reply, with refusing to receive them, my inhuman wretch wishes to deprive me of the sight of her. She insists on my departure. What will astonish you more is that I am submitting to her severity. You will blame me. However, I thought I ought not to lose the opportunity of obeying a command. Persuaded as I am on the one side that to command is to commit oneself, and on the other that elusive authority which we have the appearance of allowing women to seize is one of the snares which they find it most difficult to elude. Nay, more, the skill which this one has shown in avoiding a solitary encounter with me placed me in a dangerous situation, from which I thought I was bound to escape, whatever might be the cost. For being constantly with her, without being able to occupy her with my love, there was reason to fear that she might grow accustomed to seeing me without trouble, a disposition from which you know how difficult it is to return. For the rest, you may guess that I did not submit without conditions. I was even at the pains to impose one which it was impossible to grant, as much for the sake of remaining always free to keep my word or break it, as to promote a discussion, either by word of mouth or in writing, at a time when my beauty is more contented with me, or has need that I should be so with her. Not to reckon that I should show a signal lack of skill if I did not find a means to obtain some compensation for my desisting from this pretension, untenable as it may be. After having explained my motives in this long preamble, I come to the history of the last 2 days. I enclose as documentary evidence my beauty's letter and my reply. You will agree that few historians are as precise as I. You will remember the effect produced by my letter from Dijon on the morning of the day before yesterday. The rest of the day was most stormy. The pretty prude only appeared at dinner time, and gave out that she had a violent headache, a pretext with which she masked one of the most furious fits of ill humour that a woman could have. It absolutely altered her face. The expression of gentleness, which you know, was changed into a rebellious air, which gave it a fresh loveliness. I promise myself to make use of this discovery, and to replace sometimes the tender mistress with the sullen. I foresaw that the time after dinner would be dull, and to escape from ennui, I made a pretext of having letters to write, and retired to my own rooms. I returned to the salon about 6 o'clock. Madame de Rosemonde suggested a drive, which was agreed to. But just as we were getting into the carriage, the pretended invalid, with infernal malice, alleged in her turn, perhaps to avenge herself for my absence, an increase of the pain, and compelled me pitilessly to support a tête-à-tête with my old aunt. I know not whether the imprecations which I called down on this feminine demon were heeded, but we found her gone to bed on our return. On the following day at breakfast it was not the same woman. Her natural sweetness had returned, and I had reason to believe myself pardoned. Breakfast was hardly over when the sweet person rose with an indolent air, and went into the park. As you may believe, I followed her. "Whence can spring this desire for walking?" said I, accosting her. "I wrote much this morning," she answered, "and my head is a little tired." "I am not fortunate enough," I went on, "to have to reproach myself with this fatigue." "Indeed I have written to you," she answered again, "but I hesitate to give you my letter. It contains a request, and you have not accustomed me to hope for success." "Ah, I swear, if it be possible—" "Nothing could be easier," she broke in, "and although you ought perhaps to grant it out of justice, I consent to obtain it as a grace." As she said these words, she handed me her letter. Seizing it, I also seized her hand, which she drew away, but without anger, and with more embarrassment than vivacity. "The heat is even greater than I thought," she said. "I must go indoors." And she retraced her steps to the chateau. I made vain efforts to persuade her to continue her walk, and I needed to remind myself that we might be observed, in order to employ no more than eloquence. She entered without a word, and I saw plainly that this pretended walk had no other object than to hand me my letter. She went up to her own room as soon as we came in, and I withdrew to mine, to read the epistle, which you will do well to read also, as well as my reply, before proceeding further.
Letter the 41st. The Présidente de Tourvel to the Vicomte de Valmont.
It seems to me, monsieur, by your behaviour, as though you did but seek to multiply daily the causes of complaint which I have against you. Your obstinacy in wishing unceasingly to approach me with a sentiment which I would not and may not heed, the abuse which you have not feared to take of my good faith, or of my timidity, in order to put your letters into my hands, above all the method, most indelicate I venture to call it, which you employed to make the last reach me, without the slightest fear of the effect of a surprise which might have compromised me, all ought to give occasion on my part to reproaches as keen as they are merited. However, instead of returning to these grievances, I confine myself to putting a request to you, as simple as it is just, and if I obtain it from you, I consent that all shall be forgotten. You yourself have said to me, monsieur, that I need not fear a refusal, and although, by an inconsistency which is peculiar to you, this very phrase was followed by the only refusal which you could make me.
Note. See letter the 35th.
I would fain believe that you will none the less keep today that word, given to me formally so few days ago. I desire you, then, to have the complaisance to go away from me, to leave this chateau, where a further stay on your part could not but expose me more to the judgment of a public which is ever ready to think ill of others, and which you have but too well accustomed to fix its gaze upon the women who admit you to their society. Already warned long ago of this danger by my friends, I neglected, I even disputed their warning, so long as your behaviour towards myself could make me believe that you would not confound me with the host of women who all have had reason to complain of you. To-day, when you treat me like them, as I can no longer but know, I owe it to the public, to my friends, to myself, to adopt this necessary course. I might add here that you would gain nothing by denying my request, as I am determined to leave myself if you insist on remaining. But I do not seek to diminish the obligation which you will confer on me by this complaisance. and I am quite willing that you should know that, by rendering my departure hence necessary, you would upset my arrangements. Prove to me then, monsieur, that, as you have so often told me, virtuous women shall never have cause to complain of you. Prove, at least, that, when you have done them wrong, you know how to repair it. If I thought I had need to justify my request to you, it would suffice to say that you have spent your life in rendering it necessary, and that, notwithstanding, it has not rested with me that I should ever make it. But let us not recall events which I would forget, and which would oblige me to judge you with rigour at a moment when I offer you an opportunity of earning all my gratitude. Adieu, monsieur. Your conduct will teach me with what sentiments I must be for life your most humble, etc. At the Château de 25th August, 17 .
Letter the 42nd. The Vicomte de Valmont to the Présidente de Tourvel.
However hard, madame, the conditions that you impose on me, I do not refuse to fulfil them. I feel that it would be impossible for me to thwart any of your desires. Once agreed upon this point, I dare flatter myself in my turn that you will permit me to make certain requests to you, far easier to grant than your own, which, however, I do not wish to obtain save by my complete submission to your will. The one which I hope will be solicited by your sense of justice is to be so good as to name to me those who have accused me to you. They have done me, it seems, harm enough to give me the right of knowing them. The other, which I expect from your indulgence, is kindly to permit me to repeat to you sometimes the homage of a love which will now more than ever deserve your pity. Reflect, madame, that I am hastening to obey you, even when I can but do it at the expense of my happiness. I will say more, in spite of my conviction that you only desire my absence in order to spare yourself the spectacle, always painful, of the object of your injustice. Admit, madame, you are less afraid of a public which is too much used to respecting you to dare form a disrespectful judgment upon you, than you are annoyed by the presence of a man whom you find it easier to punish than to blame. You drive me away from you, as one turns away one's eyes from some poor wretch whom one does not wish to succour. But whereas absence is about to redouble my torments, to whom other than you can I address my complaints? From whom else can I expect the consolations which are about to become so necessary to me? Will you refuse me them when you alone cause my pains? Doubtless you will not be astonished either that before I leave I have it on my heart to justify to you the sentiments which you have inspired in me, as also that I do not find the courage to go away until I receive the order from your mouth. This twofold reason compels me to ask you for a moment's interview. In vain would we seek to supply the place of that by letters. One may write volumes, and explain poorly what a quarter of an hour's conversation were enough to leave amply understood. You will easily find the time to accord it me, for however eager I may be to obey you, you know that Madame de Rosemonde is aware of my intention to spend a part of the autumn with her, and I must at least wait for a letter in order to have the pretext of some business to call me away. Adieu, madame. Never has this word cost me so much to write as at this moment. when it brings me back to the idea of our separation. If you could imagine what it makes me suffer, I dare believe you would have some thanks for my docility. At least receive with more indulgence the assurance and the homage of the most tender and the most respectful love. At the Château de 26th August, 17.
Continuation of Letter the 40th. The Vicomte de Valmont to the Marquise de Merteuil.
And now let us sum up, my lovely friend. You can feel, like myself, how the scrupulous, the virtuous Madame de Tourvel cannot grant me the first of my requests, and betray the confidence of her friends by naming to me my accusers. Thus, by promising everything on this condition, I pledge myself to nothing. But you will feel also that the refusal which she will give me will become a title to obtain everything else, and that then I gain, by going away, the advantage of entering into a regular correspondence with her, and by her consent, for I take small account of the interview which I ask of her, and which has hardly any other object than that of accustoming her beforehand not to refuse me others when they become really needful. The only thing which remains for me to do before my departure is to find out who are the people who busy themselves with damaging me in her eyes. I presume it is her pedant of a husband. I would fain have it so. Apart from the fact that a conjugal prohibition is a spur to desire, I should feel sure that from the moment my beauty has consented to write to me, I should have nothing to fear from her husband, since she would already be under the necessity of deceiving him. But if she has a friend intimate enough to possess her confidence, and this friend be against me, it seems to me necessary to embroil them, and I count on succeeding in that. But before all, I must be rightly informed. I quite thought that I was going to be yesterday, but this woman does nothing like another. We were visiting her at the moment when it was announced that dinner was ready. Her toilette was only just completed, and while I bestirred myself and made my apologies, I perceived that she had left the key in her writing desk, and I knew her custom was not to remove that of her apartment. I was thinking of this during dinner, when I heard her waiting maid come down. I seized my chance at once. I pretended that my nose was bleeding, and left the room. I flew to the desk, but I found all the drawers open, and not a sheet of writing. Yet one has no opportunity of burning papers at this season. What does she do with the letters she receives? And she receives them often. I neglected nothing. Everything was open, and I sought everywhere. But I gained nothing except a conviction that this precious storehouse must be her pocket. How to obtain them? Ever since yesterday I have been busying myself vainly in seeking for a means. Yet I cannot overcome the desire. I regret that I have not the talents of a thief. Should these not, in fact, enter into the education of a man who is mixed up in intrigues? Would it not be agreeable to filch the letter or the portrait of a rival, or to pick from the pockets of a prude the wherewithal to unmask her? But our parents have no thought for anything. And for me, 'tis all very well to think of everything. I do but perceive that I am clumsy, without being able to remedy it. However that may be, I returned to table much dissatisfied. My beauty, however, soothed my ill humour somewhat with the air of interest which my pretended indisposition gave her, and I did not fail to assure her that for some time past I had had violent agitations which had disturbed my health. Convinced as she is that it is she who causes them, ought she not in all conscience to endeavour to assuage them? But devout though she be, she has small stock of charity. She refuses all amorous alms, and such a refusal, to my view, justifies a theft. But adieu, for all the time I talk to you, I am thinking of those cursed letters. At the Château de 27th August, 17.
Letter the 43rd. The Présidente de Tourvel to the Vicomte de Valmont.
Why seek, monsieur, to diminish my gratitude? Why be willing to give me but a half obedience, and make, as it were, a bargain of an honourable action? Is it not sufficient for you, then, that I feel the cost of it? You not only ask much, but you ask things which are impossible. If, in truth, my friends have spoken to me of you, they have only done it in my interest. Even if they have been deceived, their intention was none the less good, and you propose to me to reward this mark of attachment on their part by delivering you their secret. I have already done wrong in speaking to you of it, and you make me very conscious of that at this moment. What would have been no more than candour with another becomes a blunder with you, and would lead me to an ignominy did I yield to you. I appeal to yourself, to your honour. Did you think me capable of such a proceeding? Ought you to have suggested it to me? No, without a doubt, and I am sure that, on further reflection, you will not repeat this request. That which you make as to writing to me is scarcely easier to grant, and if you care to be just, it is not me whom you will blame. I do not wish to offend you, but with the reputation which you have acquired, and which, by your own confession, is at least in part deserved, what woman could own to be in correspondence with you? And what virtuous woman may determine to do something which she feels she will be obliged to conceal? Again, if I were assured that your letters would be of a kind of which I need never have to complain, so that I could always justify myself in my own eyes for having received them, perhaps then the desire of proving to you that it is reason and not hate which sways me would induce me to waive those powerful considerations, and to do much more than I ought, in allowing you sometimes to write to me. If indeed you desire to do so much as you say, you will voluntarily submit to the one condition which could make me consent, and if you have any gratitude for what I am now doing for you, you will not defer your departure. Permit me to remark to you on this subject that you received a letter this morning, and that you have not taken advantage of it to announce your going to Madame de Rosemonde, as you had promised me. I hope that at present nothing need prevent you keeping your word. I count above all on your not waiting for the interview which you ask of me, and to which I absolutely decline to lend myself, and I hope that, instead of the order which you pretend is necessary to you, you will content yourself with the prayer which I renew to you. Adieu, monsieur. At the Château de 27th August, 17 .
Letter the 44th. The Vicomte de Valmont to the Marquise de Merteuil.
Join in my joy, my lovely friend. I am beloved. I have triumphed over that rebellious heart. 'Tis in vain that it still dissimulates. My fortunate skill has surprised its secret. Thanks to my energetic pains, I know all that is of interest to me. Since the fortunate night of yesterday, I am once more in my element. I have resumed my existence. I have unveiled a double mystery of love and iniquity. I will delight in the one, I will avenge myself for the other. I will fly from pleasure to pleasure. The mere idea that I form of it transports me to such a degree that I have some difficulty in recalling my prudence, and shall have some, perhaps, in putting order into this narrative which I make for you. Let us try, however. Yesterday, after I had written my letter to you, I received one from the celestial Divot. I send it you. You will see in it that she gives me, with as little clumsiness as possible, permission to write to her, but she urges on my departure, and I quite felt that I could not defer it too long without injuring myself. Tormented, however, by the desire to know who could have written against me, I was still uncertain as to what course I should take. I tried to win over the chambermaid, and would fain persuade her to give up to me her mistress's pockets, which she could have easily laid hold of in the evening, and which she could have replaced in the morning, without exciting the least suspicion. I offered 10 louis for this slight service, but I only found a baggage, scrupulous or afraid, whom neither my eloquence nor my money could vanquish. I was still preaching to her when the supper bell rang. I was forced to leave her, only too glad that she was willing to promise me secrecy, on which you may judge I scarcely counted. I had never been in a worse humour. I felt myself compromised, and I reproached myself all the evening for my foolish attempt. When I had retired, not without anxiety, I sent for my chasseur, who in the quality of happy lover ought to have some credit. I wanted him either to persuade this girl to do what I had asked of her, or at least to make sure of her discretion. But he, who ordinarily is afraid of nothing, seemed doubtful of the success of the negotiation, and made a reflection on the subject, the profundity of which amazed me. Monsieur surely knows better than I, said he, that to lie with a girl is only to make her do what she likes to do. From that to making her do what we like is often a long way. Le bon sens du maraud, quelquefois m'épouvante.
Note, Piron, Métromanie.
I can the less answer for her, he added, because I have reason to believe she has a lover, and that I only owe her to the idleness of country life. So that, were it not for my zeal in Monsieur's service, I should not have had her but once. He is a real treasure, this fellow. As for secrecy, he went on, what will be the good of making her promise it, since she will run no risk in deceiving us? To speak again to her about it would only be to let her know that it was important, and thus make her all the more eager to use it for making up to her mistress. The more just these reflections seemed to me, the more was my embarrassment heightened. Luckily, the knave was started off to gossip, and as I had need of him, I let him run on. While he was relating to me his adventures with this wench, I learned that as the chamber which she occupied was only separated from that of her mistress by a bare partition, through which any suspicious noise could be heard, it was in his own that they met every night. At once I formed my plan. I communicated it to him, and we carried it out with success. I waited until 2 o'clock in the morning, and then betook myself, as we had agreed, to the scene of the rendezvous, carrying a light with me, and pretending that I had rung several times to no purpose. My confidant, who plays his parts to a marvel, went through a little scene of surprise, despair, and excuses, which I terminated by sending him to heat me some water, of which I feigned to have a need, while the scrupulous chambermaid was all the more shamefaced, in that my rascal, wishing to improve on my projects, had induced her to make a toilette which the season suggested, but did not excuse. As I felt that the more this wench was humiliated, the more easily I should dispose of her, I allowed her to change neither her position nor her costume, and after ordering my valet to await me in my room, I sat down beside her on the bed, which was in great disorder, and commenced my conversation. I had need to maintain the control which the situation gave me over her. Thus I preserved a coolness which would have done honour to the continence of Scipio, and without taking the slightest liberty with her, which, however, her freshness and the opportunity seemed to give her the right to expect, I spoke of business to her as calmly as I should have done with a lawyer. My conditions were that I would faithfully keep her secret, provided that on the morrow, at about the same hour, she would hand me the pockets of her mistress. Beside that, I added, I offered you 10 louis yesterday. I promise you them again to-day. I do not want to take advantage of your situation. Everything was granted, as you may well believe. I then withdrew, and allowed the happy couple to make up for lost time. I spent mine in sleep, and on my awakening, desiring to have a pretext for not replying to my fair one's letter before I had investigated her papers, which I could not do until the ensuing night, I resolved to go out shooting, which I did for the greater part of the day. On my return I was received coldly enough. I had a mind to believe that we were a little offended at the small zeal I had shown in not profiting by the time that was left, especially after the much kinder letter which he had written me. I judge so from the fact that Madame de Rosemonde having addressed me some reproaches for this long absence, my beauty remarked with a tone of acrimony, "Ah, do not let us reproach Monsieur de Valmont for giving himself up to the one pleasure which he can find here." I murmured at this injustice, and took advantage of it to vow that I took so much pleasure in the ladies' society that I was sacrificing for them a most interesting letter which I had to write. I added that, being unable to sleep for some nights past, I had wished to try if fatigue would restore it to me, and my eyes were sufficiently explicit both as to the subject of my letter and the cause of my insomnia. I was at the pains to wear all that evening a manner of melancholy sweetness, which seemed to sit on me well enough, and which masked the impatience I was in to see the hour arrive which was to deliver me the secret so obstinately withheld from me. At last we separated, and some time afterwards the faithful chambermaid came to bring me the price agreed upon for my discretion. Once master of this treasure, I proceeded to the inventory, with that prudence which you know I possess, for it was important to put back everything in its place. I fell at first upon 2 letters from the husband, an undigested mixture of details of lawsuits and effusions of conjugal love, which I had the patience to read in their entirety, and where I found no word that had any relation to myself. I replaced them with temper, but this was soothed when my hand lighted upon the pieces of my famous Dijon letter, carefully put together. Luckily, the whim seized me to run through it. Judge of my joy when I perceived very distinct traces of my adorable devote's tears. I confess I gave way to an impulse of youth, and kissed this letter with a transport of which I had not believed myself any longer capable. I continued my happy examination. I found all my letters in sequence and order of date. And what gave me a still more agreeable surprise was to find the first of all, the one which I thought the graceless creature had returned to me, faithfully copied by her hand, and in an altered and tremulous hand, ample witness to the soft perturbation of her heart during that employment. Thus far I was entirely given over to love. Soon it gave place to fury. Who do you think it is that wishes to ruin me in the eyes of the woman whom I adore? What fury do you suppose is vile enough to plot such a black scheme? You know her, it is your friend, your kinswoman. It is Madame de Volanges. You cannot imagine what a tissue of horrors this infernal Megaera has written concerning me. It is she alone, who has troubled the security of this angelic woman. It is through her counsels, through her pernicious advice, that I see myself forced to leave. It is she, in short, who has sacrificed me. Without a doubt, her daughter must be seduced, but that is not enough. She must be ruined, and since this cursed woman's age puts her beyond the reach of my assaults, she must be hit in the object of her affections. So she wishes me to come back to Paris. She forces me to it. Be it so. I will go back, but she shall bewail my return. I am annoyed that Danceny is the hero of that adventure. He possesses a fundamental honesty which will embarrass us. However, he is in love, and I see him often. Perhaps one may make use of him. I am losing sight of myself in my anger, and forgetting that I owe you an account of what has passed to-day. To resume. This morning I saw my sensitive prude again. Never had I found her so lovely. It must ever be so. A woman's loveliest moment, the only one when she can produce that intoxication of the soul of which we speak so constantly, and which we so rarely meet, is that one when, assured of her love, we are not yet of her favours. And that is precisely the case in which I find myself now. Perhaps, too, the idea that I was going to be deprived of the pleasure of seeing her served to beautify her. Finally, with the arrival of the postman, I was handed your letter of the 27th, and whilst I read it, I was still hesitating as to whether I should keep my word. But I met my beauty's eyes, and it would have been impossible to me to refuse her aught. I then announced my departure. A moment later, Madame de Rosemonde left us alone, but I was still 4 paces away from the coy creature, when, rising with an affrighted air, leave me, monsieur," she said. "In God's name, leave me." This fervent prayer, which betrayed her emotion, could not but animate me the more. I was already at her side, and I held her hands, which she had joined together with a quite touching expression. I was beginning some tender complaints, when some hostile demon brought back Madame de Rosemonde. The timid dévote, who had in truth some cause for fear, took advantage of this to withdraw. I offered my hand, however, which she accepted, and auguring well from this mildness, which she had not shown for a long time, I sought to press hers, whilst again commencing my complaints. At first she would fain withdraw it, but at my more lively insistence she abandoned it with a good grace, although without replying either to the gesture or to my remarks. Arrived before the door of her apartment, I wished to kiss this hand before I dropped it. The defence began by being hearty, but a "remember that I am going away," uttered most tenderly, rendered it awkward and inefficient. Hardly had the kiss been given, when the hand found strength enough to escape, and the fair one entered her apartment, where her chambermaid was in attendance. Here finishes my history. As I presume that to-morrow you will be at the Maréchal's, where certainly I shall not go to look for you, as I think it very likely too that at our first interview we shall have more than one affair to discuss, and notably that of the little Volanges, whom I do not lose sight of, I have decided to have myself preceded by this letter, and long as it is, I shall not close it until the moment comes for sending it to the post, for at the point which I have reached, everything may depend on an opportunity, and I leave you now to see if there be one. P.S. 8 o'clock in the evening, nothing fresh, not the least little moment of liberty, care taken even to avoid it. However, at least as much sorrow shown as decency permits. Another incident which cannot be without consequences is that I am charged by Madame de Rosemonde with an invitation to Madame de Volanges to come and spend some time with her in the country. Adieu, my lovely friend, until to-morrow, or the day after at the latest. At the Château de 28th August, 17...
Letter the 45th, the Présidente de Tourvel to Madame de Volanges.
Monsieur de Valmont left this morning, madame. You seemed to me so anxious for his departure that I thought I ought to inform you of it. Madame de Rosemonde much regrets her nephew, whose society, one must admit, is agreeable. She passed the whole morning in talking of him, with that sensibility which you know her to possess. She did not stint his praises. I thought it was incumbent on me to listen to her without contradiction, more especially as I must confess that on many points she was right. In addition, I felt that I had to reproach myself with being the cause of this separation, and I cannot hope to be able to compensate her for the pleasure of which I have deprived her. You know that I have by nature small store of gaiety, and the kind of life we are going to lead here is not formed to increase it. If I had not acted according to your advice, I should fear that I had behaved somewhat lightly, for I was really distressed at my venerable friend's grief. She touched me to such a degree that I could have willingly mingled my tears with her own. We live at present in the hope that you will accept the invitation which Monsieur de Valmont is to bring you, on the part of Madame de Rosemonde, to come and spend some time with her. I hope that you have no doubt of the pleasure it will give me to see you, and in truth you owe us this recompense. I shall be most delighted to have this opportunity of making an earlier acquaintance with Mademoiselle de Volanges, and to have the chance of convincing you more and more of the respectful sentiments, etc. At the Château de 29th August, 17 .